I saw a video yesterday that I thought was very interesting. I want your take on it.
Okay.
With Adam Boehler. Do you know who he is? He's
No, actually, I don't.
well, here's the Times of Israel headline about him. It says, "Meet Adam Boehler, Trump's complacent, confused, and dangerously naive hostage envoy." So he's the one that is communicating with Hamas. And he was on CNN yesterday. Let me play you the clip real quick. Let me find it. It's this one.
Do you understand why Netanyahu, Dermer, others might be upset?
I do understand. I spoke with Ron, and I'm sympathetic. He has someone that he doesn't know well, making direct contact with Hamas. Maybe I would see them and say, look, they don't have horns growing out of their head. They're actually guys like us. They're pretty nice guys. So he doesn't know me, and there are big stakes. He lives in a country where if it sets certain precedents, then it will hurt or help a lot of other people. So I understand the consternation and the concern, and I wasn't upset. At the same time, we're the United States. We're not an agent of Israel. We have specific interests at play.
Should we be excited about that? He
Yeah,
says,
actually, we do. Now, actually, now that I see him, I do know Adam Boehler. I know that story. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's very important. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. They don't have horns on their heads. They're nice guys like us. They're real people, and that is very important. Again, it's just like the dehumanization of Hamas, the dehumanization of Putin and the Russians. This allows these really terrible policies that we've had. So, yeah, I think that's wonderful. Now, he went apparently he went behind the backs of the Israeli government. They didn't inform Netanyahu ahead of time, and then Netanyahu learned about it. He was quite upset, but he just had to accept it. This is good news.
right.
It's a glimmer
I
of
feel
hope.
like it's right. I feel like it's hugely significant because it was the same thing like we were talking about with Russia. Like I said, this dehumanization campaign, the constant vilification of Putin, constant vilification of everything Russian, and then just Trump being able to make contact and talking to them and realize, hey, like I said, they don't have horns growing out of their head. They have real concerns and real interests, and they are willing to talk and negotiate. Russia isn't the one that was shutting down communication. It was the West. Under the Biden administration, there was zero contact, and that wasn't the fault of Russia. This dehumanization campaign, I think, is tenfold when it comes to with regards to Hamas and the Palestinians living in Gaza, because it's largely, we only see the Israeli side. It's constant how evil they are. You see it on social media nonstop. So I feel just him saying that they're pretty nice guys,
Yeah.
like
And
that.
it means
That's
a lot
crazy.
more. Again, also, just the fact this is something that Trump can get away with, whereas maybe Biden, I don't think Biden even would have done that or wanted to do it. But let's say if he tried, he wouldn't get away with it. He would be excoriated as a Hamas supporter and so on. But nobody can pretend that Trump is, anything but a fervent supporter of the Israelis. He has that record. So that record allows him, again, like Nixon going to China, it's the same kind of thing. It allows them actually to do these things that somebody like on the political left would not be able to do.
Right. And then the comment saying, we are the United States. We are not an agent of Israel. Have you ever heard I think him just saying that is a recognition that he knows that so many people are saying that the United States is an agent of Israel and that AIPAC money dictates foreign policy in the Middle East completely. And we give all this money. So has that ever happened before where there's that
I'm sure
kind
somebody has made a statement like that, but no, in general, like I think it was, Biden and many other politicians have made statements to the effect that there's no daylight between Israel and the U.S. We're essentially joined at the hips by choice, and anybody who wants to separate us, is obviously an evil anti-Semite. You get those kind of statements all the time. So this is, it's quite extraordinary. I'm quite happy that this is happening. Now it does give you some cause for hope. There are a lot of things. It remains a very, very scary situation, and the Zionists have a lot of power. But I I think Netanyahu's discovering that actually Trump, who is supposed to be his number one supporter, is actually a much more formidable opponent than Biden was.
Right.
Again, we're talking about, these are fairly minor issues. It's not like the U.S. government is rejecting Zionism and demanding a Palestinian state or anything like that. I mean, Trump is still talking about his ethnic cleansing project. But it's something. I mean, just the fact that those words were spoken, I think, is a real breakthrough, and I am encouraged by it.
Right. At the same time, Israel has recently cut off all electricity to Gaza. I don't know the timeline. Did this happen before Boehler? I don't know.
I think
when
it
this
happened a
comments
day
were
or
made.
two ago, and previously they cut off humanitarian aid. So things are very, very grim. I mean, they've been grim in Gaza for a long, long time, and even prior to October 7th, but they just became catastrophic after October 7th, and they still are. That's the horrible thing. It's just that no matter what kind of agreement that Hamas and Israel could possibly reach, in the end, Israel really does hold virtually all the cards. They just have complete control over this tiny sliver of territory. And there's just, as they show, they can just turn off, the electricity. They can turn off, deprive them of food and of anything really that's necessary for life. There's a little bit of agriculture, in Gaza, but that has been largely destroyed by the war. There used to be fishing, but the Israeli Navy regularly shoots at and sinks fishing boats. I mean, there's just no way for them to support themselves. So they're just completely dependent. And now I know anyway, I think at the present time, they've cut off all supplies through Rafah, where that's the Egyptian Gaza crossing right there. Now, that's the only place where, Israel doesn't have complete control, but, in the past, and I'm sure in the future, they will have, or, they do have complete control right now, but in the past, it was under the management of the Egyptians, and you would assume so that it would be under the management of the Egyptians in the future. But the thing is that Egypt is actually is a partner of Israel in all of this, and they have very little autonomy. They understand their role is to support Israel. So this is a territory that's at the mercy of Israel, and even if you can finally get the Israelis to withdraw their troops, they can do terrible things. They can the Gazans and Hamas. They remain completely dependent on Israel.
Right. But at the same time, Israel is completely dependent on the United States, right? They're at the mercy of the U.S.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. If the U.S. stops giving them bombs, fueling the aircraft maintenance, refueling everything, billions in aid, they can't do any of this, right?
I mean,
all those bombs that are being dropped, they're all American bombs, right?
Right.
None of them. Israel doesn't make the bombs themselves.
They do. Okay, they actually do have a very robust defense industry. I don't know what they make in particular. If they make bombs, I'm sure they do make bombs of some kinds, but it's just a fraction of what they get from the U.S. They would not be the regional superpower that they are without the U.S. They would be vulnerable, and it would change everything. There's no question about it. They would not have been able to conduct this year and 3 months or 2 month campaign against Gaza without the support of the U.S. They just didn't have the stockpiles. It would have ended in a couple of months. They could have done terrific damage, but not nearly the damage that they did. They wouldn't be able to. They're able to fight Hezbollah. Actually, not very effectively. They made very little progress in southern Lebanon. But they wouldn't have been able to take them on at all, without U.S. support.
What do you think the impact of this cutting off electricity is going to have on the people of Gaza? I heard something about the water.
Yeah, that's the main thing, I think, is water and, because they're desalination plants. They've been heavily damaged, but I think some of them are still functioning. And there's sewage, water treatment plants. And that's already become a real serious problem. There's just sewage in the streets, and there's just no sanitation is a huge problem. And sanitation just not only does it make, the lack of sanitation not only makes life miserable, but it also greatly increases the chance of disease. And we're seeing that already.
What is the purpose of Israel doing this?
Well, again, Netanyahu wants to get out of the ceasefire entirely. I think, and there was at least a rumor that the IDF was getting ready to go back into the places where they had pulled out. We'll see. I mean, there are countervailing forces. I don't think Trump wants them to do that now. Clearly, he has his envoy who's trying to, at least my understanding, he's not trying to negotiate the second part of the ceasefire, which Israel had earlier agreed to do, but just to negotiate an extension of the ceasefire for a few more weeks. Anyway, it seems like the Trump administration is, again, as we could hear from Trump's envoy, is not eager, that does not want to see a resumption of hostilities. And they are looking for a negotiated settlement of some kind. And then within Israel's society, there is a real divide. It's not like Israel speaks with one mind. I think at least half the country does not want to see the IDF go back in because they're sick of the fire. The IDF itself is just worn out. They're not a force that was ever meant to conduct, this kind of long-term warfare. The idea was quick victories, something within a month or two at the most, and they've gone on for a long time. And there's a real problem with morale, is my understanding, and a lot of so again, the IDF. About half of Israeli society that's really focused on the hostages. And this includes some very powerful Zionists, like Miriam Adelson. I think she's actually part of that faction. It's not that she's any less of a Zionist than she used to be, but just looking at the short-term tactics, say, no, we got to stop for now. We got to get the hostages home. But then you have Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the ultra-nationalists, who are a very powerful group of people within Israeli society, and particularly within Netanyahu's coalition. And they want to see the ceasefire end very soon. And they want to see Israel the IDF go back in. They're also already getting part of their wishes. One thing they were demanding was a cessation of humanitarian aid and of electricity. And Netanyahu's given that to them.
I wonder if sometimes I think Netanyahu might be trying to walk this line of triggering a humanitarian crisis in Gaza to weaken Gaza, Hamas to some extent, but more so to almost invite an attack within the surrounding Arab nations or from the West Bank. Once you see a humanitarian crisis start to get out of hand and more people dying on the streets of starvation or disease, people are going to be upset, and rightly so. And then once there's some type of an attack on Israel in response to what's happening there, then Netanyahu will be able to play that up and say, look, Israel's under attack, and try to garner more sympathy and complete his goal of ethnically cleansing Gaza. Do you think... I just don't, or is he just doing it just to stay in power because he's afraid of his corruption charges?
Well, I think that may be part of it. And then also he's in favor of Greater Israel, and he wants to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And I think actually probably the majority of Israelis want to do the same thing. It's just like a question of how fast. That's the main question. There is a small minority, again, the 2% that thought too much was done. We're talking about a very small minority. But most Israelis would like to take Gaza. Do we just starve them out right now, or do we agree to a ceasefire for the time being, get all the hostages back, and then find some excuse to go back in later? I think that's really the main issue, to be honest. I don't think that he's doing this to garner sympathy, because he's obviously, starving civilians has hurt him, at least, in most nations of the world. But he doesn't seem to be very concerned about that. Again, he feels very sure about his support from the U.S. I think that's all that really matters. But if that falters, and I think like this statement that we just heard, that has got to put a little bit of fear in, fear of God in him right there. I mean, just say, wait a second, I haven't ever heard the Americans talk like this before. We got to be a little bit careful,
Right. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if we can change the narrative. I just don't see it happening on mainstream media. It's just been so, pro-Zionist. I mean, the pro-Israeli. I mean, there is a little bit on MSNBC. I see occasionally. Yeah, but Fox News.
The
right. It's just crazy, So.
Yeah, but I mean, if this is just one instance and it doesn't happen again, okay, the narrative's not going to be affected in any serious way. But if we start to get more and more of this, again, it's coming from the Trump side, so that's going to even affect the way, these very fervent Trump supporters look at Israel. So we'll just have to see. Is this an aberration, or is this a part of a new trend? And if it's a trend, then the consequences could be major.
I was just thinking, why is it that mainstream media, you have the MSNBC so sometimes report more sympathetically towards the Palestinian side when reporting on Israel and Palestine. They seem to be a little bit more objective there. But then on the right side, it's the opposite, but they'll be more objective when they're talking about the Ukraine-Russia war, more so, slightly more so. Well, why is it that they both are promoting separate false narratives on one conflict and the other? Like it's wild when I watch both sides. It's just two completely different worlds,
right?
And why is it? Is it all just money fueling one narrative and then money fueling this other narrative? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, well, it's just the constant. I think it's mainly the consequence of partisanship, polarization. You get these, especially in the U.S., where we have a two-party system. We get this bifurcation, like there are just two sides to every question, and you get the two parties, and for various reasons, and money figures into that, and culture, like in the case of. Talking about Zionism, there is big money on both sides. But so you get the establishment is actually very firmly pro-Zionist on both the Democratic and Republican sides of this. But when you get down to the common people, it's something different. And I think I think part of it is Christian Zionism in the case of the U.S. That's something that that's a cultural force that's very significant on the right side, among the red states, and it does affect the views of a lot of voters, regardless of what kind of money. But you don't have that same influence on the leftist side, and then. On the leftist side, you do have this history of, let's say, anti-colonialism, and Palestine kind of fits very naturally into that viewpoint. So often it is this general kind of anti-colonialist language that's used by leftists, and there's more cognitive dissonance on the leftist side if you're trying to justify what the Israelis are doing, because that's a settler society, and this is part of what all these various movements that you supported over the decades were anti-settler, were anti-colonialist, and so I think there's just a natural kind of tendency on that side. So you do get much more sympathy. It's just something that comes out of the leftist mindset. Now, I think it's unfortunate. It's just like the world isn't divided into two. That's an artificial division. But there's a tendency to fall into one side or the other. And then once you do, like there are a lot of people, I think, who they're not naturally disposed to support Zionism or to hate Palestinians, but they find themselves on the conservative side of the spectrum. And then they see these, they see these pro-Palestine protests and so on, and they just kind of poo-poo it because they know on all these other issues, or they assume that on all these other issues, these leftist protesters are bonkers, and support, transgenderism or whatever it is. And so they just have a tendency to dismiss it because it's just, it's that side. You can't believe anything that they say on that side. This is a result, again, of hyper-partisanship. People stop thinking clearly and just make assumptions. Now, it is very encouraging if the Trump administration is starting to open the door, because I think that will allow people on the right side of the spectrum to look at it and say, hey, wait a second. And we're already seeing that, among younger conservatives. Because, again, there is that 75% of Republicans are sympathetic with Israel, only 10% with Palestine, with the Palestinians. But if you look at like the under 25s or something, it's very different. There's a much larger percentage of people in that of conservatives that are sympathetic with the Palestinians. So there is already an opening there, and maybe what Trump is doing now will add to that, and we'll see a real diminution of support for Israel. We're a long ways from there, but there is a beginning. Everything has to begin somewhere.
Yeah, and it can change quickly. That's the thing. Narratives can really change pretty rapidly. We're seeing that already with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I mean, just think about how different. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's true. It will be more difficult in the case of Israel, as I said, because I've always said that the support for Ukraine was actually really very superficial. There are very few people. There's some, including a neighbor of mine, who are passionately attached to Ukraine. But that is a very small percentage of the population. Unfortunately, there are many people that are passionately attached to Israel. Many people in this country, on both sides of the political spectrum, secular, Christian, Jewish, and it's going to be a tougher fight. So I don't think it's going to go as rapidly as what we've seen in Ukraine. I think it's just a lot of people were told one thing. They didn't really know anything about Ukraine. And then they're told another thing and they changed their minds. But it's not going to be like that for Israel.
Well, I think it depends on how you frame it. This attachment to Israel is sort of Israel as its current state. And they have this view that Israel is constantly under attack. They don't understand the concept of greater Israel. I think most Christian Zionists don't support the idea of greater Israel. That's something within Israel itself. So if you're able to frame it in a way that's saying, look, we want to keep Israel safe. So we got to establish firm borders for Israel, because Israel is the only country in the UN or in the world, right, that does not have defined boundaries. It just keeps on fluctuating and moving and expanding. Nobody knows really where it is.
Right.
I mean, you have
that's a deliberate policy. Right.
Right. So if the Trump team came in and just said, we're going to settle this, the way to settle it is to have an agreement on where this line should be, right? That there has to be a boundary for Israel. And if you do that, can't you frame that as being good for Israel? Now Israel is safe. We will protect you as long as you stay within your lines, but, and if they reject that, then you can say, well, look, then this is on you, right? And I think support for Israel would fall apart. I just feel like that's a very reasonable, rational thing to do. If you're actually pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist, just say that, okay, we want to keep you safe, respect the lines, we get a deal, and then is that not possible?
Well, it's not impossible. It's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough. I think I can't say this for sure, but I believe many Christian Zionists are in favor of greater Israel. Like the more Israel there is, the better. That's the way they look at it. But they, again, you can finesse it. Maybe there is a way to to convince them to drop that part of their point of view, but
Well, don't they want Christians to be part of Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Nazareth, Nablus, all these places? I mean, as a Christian, surely you want that place to be for Christians as well, right? Not just...
Well, the Christian Zionists don't have that point of view. There are Christians, of course, in those places. There used to be a lot more than there are now, but there still are significant numbers of Christians in those places. But they're not Christians that are recognized by the Christian Zionists. They just seem to... They either don't want to think about them, or if they're aware of them, they typically just think of them as not being real Christians. And in a way, again, they think that their dispensationalist view, this eschatological belief that they have it depends on Jewish occupation of the land. And they say that's a stage that we need to go through to eventually get to the return of Jesus, the second coming. We've gone into that before. I don't want to go into all of that, but it's unfortunately, it seems with Christian Zionists that they are actually not concerned about Christian presence in the Holy Land at this time. That's something that'll come after the Jewish occupation and the full establishment of the kingdom of Israel, which they believe will happen in the near future.
Guys, thanks for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please check out my website, nobliski.io. You can look at the pinned comment below. It's something that I think you'll find useful. Even my dad uses it. My wife uses it. Instead of Googling things, you should be using this website because you get access to OpenAI, Perplexity, Anthropic, DeepSeek. There's hundreds of models that you can use. It's what I use to create the thumbnail images, things like this. And the greatest thing about it is there's no rate limits. There are no subscription fees. It's free to try out and use. You get free tokens every day. So if you're not a heavy AI user, you will never have to pay for anything. But this is really my passion project. I really want to get it off the ground, and I think you guys would like it. So yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you have time to download the apps and give it 5 stars, that'd mean a lot to me as well. Thanks a lot.